Today, I'm counting down the 15 weirdest facts about the ocean. Let's start with number 15. Do you know the longest mountain range is underwater? While the longest mountain range above water is the Andes at 6,760 kilometers long, the longest mountain range in the world is beneath the ocean. It's known as the Mid-Oceanic Ridge. It snakes between all continents, and it clocks in at about 65,000 kilometers long. So in other words, it's nearly 10 times longer than the Andes. Number 14. The Pacific Ocean is wider than the moon. So sometimes it can be pretty hard to visualize exactly how large the oceans are. If you want a quick and easy reference, look up at the moon in the night sky. While it may look massive at a sizable 3,400 kilometers in width, the Pacific Ocean comes in at 19,000 kilometers in width. This makes the Pacific more than 5 times larger than Earth's beloved little satellite. Number 13. Large buildings like the Burj Khalifa and massive industrial spaces like the Tesla Gigafactory. The world's largest structure by surface area is located underwater. That structure is none other than Australia's Great Barrier Reef. The whole thing was formed using coral, and it's a massive 348,000 square kilometers in surface area. This makes it multiple times larger than any human-built structure on the planet. Number 11. It's better than a museum. So over the years, different countries have created museums to commemorate their history. However, over that same period of time, many ships have sunk beneath the ocean, and by our count, the number sits at about 3 million. This is because, according to some estimates, there are more artifacts in underwater shipwrecks than there are in museums, making these watery wrecks of massive importance to the cultural heritage of mankind. However, given the remote watery location of these wrecks, it's more than likely that many of the artifacts below the surface are in pretty crummy condition. Are stronger too, with a flow rate of more than 3.4 million cubic meters of water per second, about 50,000 times the flow of Niagara Falls. Now, it might seem strange to have a waterfall in the ocean, like where exactly would the water fall to? This phenomenon is possible due to the differences in water temperature and density. In the Denmark Strait, dense, cold water meets less dense, warm water. When they converge, the colder, denser water sinks below the warmer and flows over a massive drop in the ocean floor. Now, some companies have suggested harnessing the energy of these underwater waterfalls to create renewable energy. The idea is that a submerged apparatus inside of it could collect the energy in a tank and convert it directly into electricity. However, whether this technology can be feasible on a commercial scale is yet to be determined. If you want to see an underwater waterfall for yourself, you can visit the small African island nation of Mauritius. Now, while not exactly a waterfall in the same technical sense as the Denmark Strait Cataract, this Mauritian version is fueled by an optical illusion, thanks to the In 1997, researchers from the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration were targeting underwater volcanic activity in the South Pacific when they recorded a strange yet powerful sound. Using underwater microphones spread out about 3,200 kilometers apart across the Pacific, they recorded numerous instances of the noise, which was unlike anything they ever heard before. It was an ultra-low frequency sound, and throughout the summer, it was heard multiple times, yet it hasn't been heard since. At a loss, the researchers called it the bloop, and soon everyone from scientists to internet conspiracy theorists began hypothesizing. Those who guessed were split into two camps. The first believed the bloop came from an animal, while the second thought it had to do with ice movements. The animal camp was headed by researcher Christopher Fox, and in a private interview with David Woolman of Fox News, Woolman reported that Fox's hunch is that the sound nicknamed the bloop is most likely to come from some sort of animal, because its signature is a rapid variation in frequency similar to that supported by the fact that the bloop was consistent with noises generated by ice quakes and by large icebergs scraping the ocean floor. After balancing out both options, in 2012, the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration officially reported the iceberg hypothesis. This has become the most widely accepted explanation. Number 8. Its deepest point is deeper than Mount Everest. At a height of 8,849 meters, Mount Everest is the highest point on Earth. For reference, it's about as tall as 11 Burj Khalifas stacked on top of each other. However, on the inverse side of things, the deepest point on Earth could easily swallow up Mount Everest. It's known as the Mariana Trench. This point is located about 200 kilometers east of the Mariana Islands in the West Pacific. In terms of size, it's about 2,550 kilometers in length, 69 kilometers in width, and about 10,935 meters in depth. This is so deep that if you drop Mount Everest inside of it, the Mariana Trench took place on January 23, 1960. The Trieste, a craft that was French-built, U.S. Navy-operated, Swiss-designed, and Italian-named, made the descent. Swiss ocean engineer Jacques Piccard and U.S. naval officer Don Walsh completed the journey, making it a true international achievement. After that, there was a 52-year gap where nobody made it to the bottom until March 26, 2012, when Canadian filmmaker James Cameron reached the bottom. Using the submersible Deep-Sea Challenger, he made it all the way on his own, establishing a new world record for a solo descent. Victor Vescovo revolutionized the journey to the bottom by commissioning an innovative submarine known as the DSV Limiting Factor. At a cost of $37 million, it certainly wasn't cheap. However, since its creation, it's brought at least 21 new explorers to the bottom of the trench. Well, despite its success, in 2022, Vescovo sold it to American billionaire Gabe Newell's Inkfish Ocean Exploration Research Organization. And to date, it's been... You see, while the ocean may look uniform, different parts of it are actually denser than others. Think of it like the layers of an onion. As a result, internal waves will only go ever between the two layers. The interesting thing about these internal waves is that they have a series of different causes. Many are created by the tides, as both the gravitational pulls of the sun and the moon can create underwater currents. Another cause can be ocean stratification. When two different layers of ocean mix, denser, cooler water will often meet warmer, lighter water, creating an internal wave. Now, what's crazy about these internal waves is they can be absolutely massive. It's not uncommon for them to reach heights of up to 100 meters and stretch for several kilometers. For reference, the waves of the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami came in at just half that height and were far shorter. Beyond being underwater, though, these waves are also different from normal ones because they're far slower than their above-water counterparts. And while this may make them sound safe, they can actually wreak havoc. While the internal waves are no threat to boats on top of the water, they can cause volcanoes erupt underwater. Now, when you think of volcanoes, massive spurts of lava and ash coming out of a rocky top are probably what comes to your mind. However, the reality is that 80% of volcanoes erupt underwater. Most of these volcanoes are found in the Pacific, in an area known as the Ring of Fire. Located across the eastern and western coastlines of the Pacific in a U-shaped ring, there are thousands of volcanoes within this chain. Now, due to the location, these volcanoes behave differently than their above-water counterparts. Because they erupt into water instead of air, the sheer weight of the water above them creates very high pressure. This makes explosive eruptions almost impossible, so most of what's expelled moves along the sea floor in what are known as passive lava flows. They can still pack a punch from time to time with the help of larger quantities of magma and shifts in tectonic plates. Many volcanic eruptions have managed to create entirely new islands. While this process has happened countless times over the millennia, one of the most famous islands created in recent memory is Surtsey, Japanese island of Iwo Jima. While it grew for some time, it disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared. By March of 2024, it was no longer visible. So while underwater volcanoes can be powerful, their creations are sometimes rather fickle. Number 5. Did you know the world's most remote place is in the ocean? Given how massive the oceans are, it's not too surprising that the world's most remote place is also located on the high seas. It's known as the Pole of Inaccessibility, or Point Nemo for short, and it lies in the South Pacific Ocean. This remote point is equally far away from the 3 closest points of land. It is 2,688 kilometers away from Ducie Island, part of the Pitcairn Islands, Motunui, one of the Easter Islands, and Maher Island, part of Antarctica. As you might imagine, there's no real reason to spend any time here. In fact, the area is so remote that no regular marine or air traffic routes are within 400 kilometers of it. As a result, for its designation as the world's most remote spot, this area in the South Pacific was known as a perfect out-of-the-way place for countries to deposit space junk. Over the years, about 300 decommissioned space vessels, mostly Soviet or Russian, have been steered here, with some of the most famous including Russia's Mir space station and the European Space Agency's Jules Verne. And interestingly, Point Nemo's soon to have a high-profile visitor. In 2031, the International Space Station is set to be decommissioned. When this happens, the plan for it is to crash into Point Nemo so that it can be as far as possible from any humans. And while it might be cool to witness the massive splash, for your safety, I'd suggest staying as far away as possible. Number 4. Did you know the ocean is filled with gold? While the world's oceans may look nothing like the dark, earthy depths of a gold mine, the reality is that they're homes to enormous amounts of the valuable gold rock. Now, while estimates as to how much gold actually exists in our oceans vary from the ocean floor, that sediment's then processed to extract the gold. However, it's not only expensive, but it's also harmful to the environment. After all, the dredging process can damage marine habitats and release toxins into the water. Thankfully, there are also other, less invasive methods of extracting gold from the ocean. Some methods have been proposed, including using magnetic nanoparticles or bacteria to collect gold particles. It's also worth noting that the cost of extracting gold from the ocean is way higher than removing it from the earth. So until we are low on gold reserves on land, it's likely that serious efforts will be made to find more of the stuff underwater unless a major technological breakthrough happens. It is worth noting that the ocean isn't the only place on Earth with unreachable gold. According to some scientists, the Earth's core is believed to contain vast amounts of the precious metal. By some estimates, as much as 1.5 quadrillion tons. However, because it's located about 2,900 kilometers below the surface, reaching it with today's technology would simply be impossible, thanks to our massive rates of plastic dumping. According to Conservation International, as a collective, humans dump 8 million metric tons of plastic into the ocean each year. For reference, that's about as heavy as the weight of 1.8 million African elephants. So, the situation has gotten so bad that it's believed that about 50% of turtles and 90% of seabirds have plastic in their stomachs, which can in turn lead to massive health problems. Now, this leaves us with an obvious question. How do we get rid of all the plastic? Well, the project is gargantuan. To date, our best hope may be a non-profit known as the Ocean Cleanup. Ever since 2013, they've been behind a push to clean up 90% of the plastic in the world's oceans, and in order to do so, they have some pretty cool plans. The first part is to clean up the plastic currently in the ocean. Now, rather conveniently, most ocean plastic accumulates in one of 5 ocean garbage patches. There are 2 in the Pacific, 2 in the Atlantic, and 1 in the Indian Ocean. The largest one is the Great Pacific Garbage Barrier Machine. And while they've been using it since 2019, they plan to have their 3rd edition of it out running soon. The second part of the plan is to prevent more plastic buildup by going to the source. By Ocean Cleanup's judgment, this source can be mostly pinned down to rivers. Now, while there are thousands of rivers that empty out into the ocean, just 1% of these rivers are responsible for 80% of the pollution in the ocean's waters. To date, Ocean Cleanup has a few proprietary machines that specialize in river cleanups, with these including the Interceptor Original, the Interceptor Barrier, and the Interceptor Tender. The hope is that all these machines combined can cause a lot of the plastic that seeps into the ocean to be picked up, recycled, and reused. Number 2. Did you know that there's a shark cafe? If you've watched Nat Geo's Shark Week, then you know that sharks are pretty dangerous. Located across the world's oceans, they range from relatively docile, small reef sharks to massive great whites. And generally speaking, it's only these they notice something strange. In the 6-month period after they were tagged, 3 of the 4 sharks made their way over to a 250 square kilometer long area they nicknamed White Shark Cafe. This was pretty weird for a few reasons. First and foremost, great white sharks are solitary hunters, so for them to congregate at a random spot in the ocean seems kinda strange. What was even weirder is the activity the shark tags tracked. The tags found that the males would bob up and down as much as 120 times per day, reaching depths of up to 1,400 feet. Meanwhile, females dove to even deeper waters, with this activity primarily happening during daylight. Even stranger, after more studies were conducted, it was found that as much as 20% of California's great white shark population migrates to this special spot. Now, it turns out the reason why these sharks meet up here is to grab a bite to eat. You see, while it was once believed that White Shark Cafe was a dead zone filled with very little food, it turns out that the depths between 200 meters and several kilometers, it still is unknown why female sharks don't display the same diving behavior as their male counterparts. According to Jorgensen, it could be related to mating, or it could be simply that they're eating something different. However, to date, nobody really knows for sure. Number 1. Did you know icebergs could give us drinking water? Have you ever tried to drink a bit of sea or ocean water? You quickly find yourself gulping down a large load of salt. However, it turns out that while seawater is not drinkable, iceberg water is. You see, as icebergs age, the pockets of brine inside them drain out. Eventually, the iceberg water becomes fresh enough for us to melt and drink. And while it may seem far-fetched for us to break apart icebergs and then turn them into drinking water, the idea has been floated around for quite some time, no pun intended. In 1956, oceanographer John Dove Isaacs became one of the first to articulate the idea when he suggested capturing an 8 million ton iceberg in the Southern Ocean and towing it to San Diego, California. That's because given the warm waters of Cape Town's oceans, if an iceberg were to be moored off the coast, it would melt away within weeks or even days, if not quickly harvested. Therefore, it's been calculated that if no measures were made to protect an iceberg upon arrival, it would have to start its journey in Antarctica, measuring at a whopping 5 kilometers in length. However, given how much water shortages are ramping up, it soon may be necessary to use expensive insulation materials in order to facilitate these iceberg journeys. Of course, there are some groups that are not all that fond of iceberg harvesting. For example, tour operators in the region that take tourists on rides to see the icebergs say that this business is destroying their livelihood. Environmentalists also have raised some alarm bells. You see, when the iceberg is broken apart, the surrounding ocean water becomes fresher and the iceberg releases nutrients such as nitrates, phosphates, iron, and sulfur. This causes the denser, saltier water to sink as a nutrient-rich water reaches the surface. This is a problem because it destroys local. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time.